Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 360. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to help support and inspire new trauma workers through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. Thanks so much for joining me today, and here we go. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited today to have my guest, Maddie Caballo. Maddie, welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So Maddie is a sought-after international speaker, educator, coach, and equine facilitator who shares her experience of extreme abuse to enlighten, educate, and encourage others. At the age of 20, Maddie was standing at the crossroads of continuing the pattern of intergenerational abuse she'd experienced or trying to escape the community that had controlled her since birth and leave with very few skills to survive in a world outside of her control. Now, Maddie shares her experience with first responders, lawyers, medical providers, therapists, and other professionals of what are the most effective and respectful ways to work with someone with complex trauma, dissociation, and PTSD. All right, Maddie, welcome. Obviously, just a bit about you, but share with our listeners where you're calling from and where you're from originally, and then let's do it.
All right. So I'm calling from the Phoenix, Arizona area, and I'm originally from Illinois, so the Midwest.
Okay.
And I relocated to Arizona in 2010, so
Awesome.
I'm enjoying the nice weather here now.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to kind of get into your story. But first, let's start out with a quote, mantra, sentence, something to kind of set the context here. What do you have for us?
All right. So I was thinking about, which quote's kind of been the most impactful. And I have quite a few that I kind of live by in my daily life. But there's one in particular that is kind of my go-to. And it's by Benjamin Mee from the movie We Bought a Zoo. And the quote is, sometimes all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage. Just literally 20 seconds of just embarrassing bravery. And I promise you something great will come of it.
But Benjamin Mee, how do you spell that last name?
M-E-E.
M-E-E. Awesome. So why that quote?
So, I was introduced to that quote shortly after I started working with the therapist I'm currently working with. And she said that to me at a moment when I was really struggling to put words to my experience. And, when I really started thinking about it, if I could just stop thinking so far out and just take the courage in that moment to say that one thing, it helped me to be able to kind of propel myself and keep propelling myself forward. I think for me, when I looked at everything, it was too big of a picture. And so breaking everything down into just 20-second increments and taking that 20 seconds and the next 20 seconds and the next 20 seconds has really helped me grow. Yeah.
Say that quote again, if you don't mind.
Sure. It's, sometimes all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage. Just literally 20 seconds of just embarrassing bravery. And I promise you something great will come of it. All
right. So let's kind of get into this. Tell the listeners here the story. Why are we talking today? What led you to this place?
So, really my past, my 20 years of growing up and, there's all kinds of different words that people use for it, but it's in extreme torture and ritual abuse. Some people call it intergenerational abuse. There's all kinds of different things. But what it was is a lack of being able to have any kind of control or safety in my environment. And I got to a place where, I got myself out of that situation, but then it was still very hard and difficult for me to learn how to cope in the outside world. But I've been doing a lot of work towards healing, and I got to a place where, I had this a thing in my mind that was going to happen if I kept working in my healing journey enough. And it was that it wasn't going to be a part of me. I was going to be able to work hard enough to make it not be a part of who I am. And when I realized that that wasn't going to happen, it really was more about accepting that these things happened to me and they were all a part of my story. I got really sad and I was really upset and I didn't really quite know what to do with that. And so it took me a little while to realize that what I can do is share my experience and help educate other people and help them better understand it from the perspective of somebody who's been there. Because what I ran into, I guess, in just my own journey and trying to seek out assistance and help is a lot of misunderstanding in how to help me and how to talk with me and how to approach me. And it's just, I can offer something that just isn't available through classroom training or textbooks that practitioners use to learn about it.
So, I mean, if we were to kind of dial in a little bit, and I'm not asking you to share your story, whatever you feel comfortable with throughout, but what was it like when you said to yourself, I need to start healing, or something needs to shift for me? Can you talk a little bit about that process for you?
Yeah, I would say there's probably was different points along the way of what that looked like. So, the first step was for me to get out of the situation where I wasn't continually being abused. So I started therapy at around 17 and a half. Just circumstances kind of lent themselves where I was able to get there, and but I wasn't out of the situation yet. So it took about 2.5 years before I trusted that I would survive leaving the situation and not be killed as a result of not obeying them. And so then I just kind of was in a place of just learning how to be in a world where I had choices and decisions to make and those kinds of things. And then I had about 10 years where I went out and I, was living life the way that I thought that I could, which was basically just doing the opposite of the way I was raised, because I figured that was a good practice and a good way to be, because I knew that what they did wasn't right, but it wasn't still fully living. And, unfortunately, a lot of folks who have been abused extensively end up being a target for future abuse, and I was no different. And at 33, I was sexually assaulted at knife point at work early one morning, and it started, a whole roller coaster of things coming back up for me. And so I realized that was, the next point I would say that I really kind of started saying, okay, what's next? How do I heal? What do I do? And so I worked for several years, but that was more just restabilizing myself until I made it to Arizona, and I met a practitioner who combined equine with trauma work. And in that, that's where what I would call started coming alive with my healing and started really having feelings that I didn't know there was anything really other than happy or sad. And so that was the point where I kind of realized that there's so much more that I didn't even know that existed or could be. It just wasn't within the realm of what I knew how to experience until the last 7 years, and that's kind of been what I've been working at.
When you prior to that, when you were seeing therapists or therapists, what was there a lot that wasn't working for you? What did that look like for you? There
was a lot of things that weren't working, and you don't know what you don't know. And that's true for me as a client as well as for the therapist. And I would say, the biggest thing that happened was that they continued to kind of let me live in the cycle of my abuse. So the listeners may not realize, but with the type of abuse that I experienced, there's a certain calendar that that people follow that do that sort of thing. And so there's dates that always triggered me. And as those dates came around, it was always about restabilization, and it was never really growing past that. It was just kind of living, and my body would live on that cycle. So I would literally feel the past as though it was happening in the present on those dates and those moments. And so it was, they didn't know how to help me kind of break that cycle. And so that was probably the earliest thing that was the most difficult, and probably wanting to know too much about the scenario too soon, asking me lots and lots of questions about the details of what happened. And I had huge trust issues, which a lot of people who are highly traumatized do. And so, getting into too much detail too soon with me was would scare me off.
Yeah, sure.
And not want me to kind of persist, or even it kind of built distrust in my mind. It was like, okay, like, are they trying to form a case against me? Are they trying to, I had all kinds of scenarios that went through my head. And probably the other thing I would think is that they had, a lot of times, like with therapy, there's different types, but there's some sort of activities or task or an agenda created for the session. And being highly dissociative, I had so much stuff going on inside of me, so many parts that were all trying to communicate with me and tell me things, and just so much internally going on that when externally there was being a lot asked of me as well. It made it very confusing and difficult to do it. So, that's another thing that, as people are learning how to work with highly traumatized people, like really slowing down, even if it seems extremely slow, is like incredibly helpful.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you sharing that. So you talked about, finally finding this therapist who seemed to certainly be more educated, more trauma informed. What did that look like for you? How was that different?
Having somebody that was more trauma informed?
Yeah. Or more educated about trauma, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was hugely significant, and in just that she knew the things that were going to like trigger me too far and helping me like learn to stay within my window of tolerance. And none of those were words I would have known when I first started working with her, but she knew those things to help me, because as a client, I was just all over the place. I wasn't showing up on her doorstep because I had it all together and knew how to manage myself. I was showing up because I needed help and guidance and being able to learn how to manage what had happened to me. And
can I just interrupt for a second, Maddie? So when you went to see these different therapists, did you go because of what was going on with you, or did you go under the auspices of, I'm depressed, or I'm anxious, or I don't know what's going on? Were you explicit about what was going on with you?
Oh gosh, in the early days, it was mostly like mandated by courts or something like that, like when I was really young. But after the incident happened at work and it was my choice, I really, literally, my goal was to not even get into what had happened to me in the past, but to literally just deal with what happened to me at work, because I wasn't able to go to work and I wasn't able to work inside my office even when I was at work. And so it was just, I was dysfunctional and not able to cope and be able to do the things I needed to do to take care of my daughters and myself. And so that's what took me back to therapy after so long. And I've been back in therapy since then. So for the last 15 years, going 2 to 3 times a week. And eventually at some point I started disclosing a little bit in pieces of my past history, because my life was just becoming so unmanageable, and I was starting to self-harm a lot, and I ended up hospitalized and all kinds of different things. So as it kind of kept unraveling, I realized I didn't really have a choice but to kind of open that door back up and deal with what had happened to me as a child.
So you mentioned children. Did you get married and have kids? How did that come about?
I did. So after I left the situation I was in, I graduated from college, and my goal was I just wanted, I wanted to create that life, that family, that kind of storybook kind of, I think, ideal life for myself. And I thought that was like the next right thing to do. So I did end up get married, and I had 2 beautiful daughters, and raised them.
So how do things unfold such that you're like, I've got to put something together to help other people? What did that look like for you? Share with us that story, if you will, Maddie.
I will. So I said a little bit of it earlier, but I was sitting in a session one afternoon with my therapist, and she had heard me tell the story, and I came to her with this very structured, built out idea about what it was going to look like for me to heal. And what it looked like for me was that I imagined like all the different parts within myself being butterflies. And whenever they felt heard and they felt healed enough, I was going to send them out into the world. But they weren't going to be a part of me. I was going to kind of do this whole butterfly release kind of thing. And I really I wholeheartedly kind of lived that, and that was what kind of kept propelling me to come into therapy every time and every session, and work really hard at it, and do all the things I thought I needed to do to get to heal. And so she kind of kept giving me probably a lot of suggestions along the way, but one day it kind of hit me. I had an aha moment. I'm like, oh my gosh, what she's saying is that these parts are part of me, and this is part of my story, and I need to accept that this happened to me, and I'm not going to be able to just get rid of it by sending out these butterflies into the world. And so, I cried a lot, and I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Because then it became, it felt like a life sentence. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with all that, and I just felt really devastated, I think, in that moment when I really realized that was what my fate was. And so I sat down and I'm like, okay, but then there's got to be something positive that I can do with a situation that was awful. And so that's how I kind of came to the idea of okay, I've had a lot of difficulty with, finding people who really understood me. There was, people who, not with intention, but probably did more harm than good by not understanding trauma. And I had been in education for a very long time, so over 20 years. And I was like, okay, I could combine my experience in education with my story and go out and help educate people so that those after me might have an improved experience when they're trying to be helped.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so where does the equine aspect come into play?
That was a huge turning point for me. So the therapist that I started working with in Arizona, that's really kind of, I was scrolling, trying to find people, Google searching and things like that, and she came up as a trauma therapist, but she did equine therapy as well, and I was like, wow, I haven't tried that. And, I went to a workshop she was having, and it was pretty much after that, I had never felt myself want to connect with something more than that horse. And that was saying a lot, because I just didn't let myself really care about things or connect with people. Were very terrifying for me because they had hurt me the most. And so, but I felt something that wanted to I kept feeling drawn back to the equine, and I started asking her if I could work with her individually doing equine sessions, and it became a huge part of our work. And really, we didn't actually even step into anything new without being with the horses beside us, because I needed that to be able to kind of keep one foot in the present while working on the past. And so, and the horses helped me be able to do that. I mean, they're very intuitive animals. They're prey animals, so they very much pick up on energy, and they demand you to be congruent in order to stay with you. Otherwise, they don't feel safe and they leave. And so they kind of give you immediate feedback, as far as immediate feedback from my therapist, to how dissociated I was in that moment. And so it has been a huge part of my work, my healing work. And then one thing led to another, and I adopted horses of my own and have a little farm with horses on it now.
Well, I mean, there's so many aspects that I want to kind of follow up here. But for those of us who don't really know and aren't that familiar, what does it mean to work with an equine therapist, or in that context? I mean, what specifically are you doing with the horse? What do things look like?
When I work with my therapist, is that what you're asking?
Or yeah.
Okay. I have a really unique therapist who is, she's a licensed practitioner and highly trained in trauma. and also does EMDR, and she is equine experience as well. So I can work with her like individually. Sometimes people have to have more than one person there to accommodate all those skill sets, but she actually has that. And so a lot of times it doesn't look like much, actually. I mean, it's, I talked earlier about the importance of really slowing everything way down. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times what it looked like is just kind of the two of us sitting and talking. But what happens is that the horses just kind of know when to come in because they pick up on that energy, and they come and kind of hold space and support and offer messages. Like you can see outwardly, like them releasing at the same time, like I let something go. And, and it was very empowering, especially in the early days of me doing the equine work, to have this. At first I couldn't ask a horse to move back or ask like a horse to back up off of me. I find it really easy now, but that's because like I know how to energetically have that within me, which is a huge skill set to have like in the world in general, so that you don't have people run over you. And I learned how to set boundaries with the horses and ask for things that I needed, either ask my therapist to help me if I didn't know how to do something, whereas I wouldn't do that when I first started working with them. So there's so many aspects of the work that I was able to really move forward, and I had that like want to with the horses, as opposed to, and it kind of broke up like what I was doing, as opposed to just sitting in my therapist's office like, okay, this is the next date that's coming up. I'm feeling like really nervous and scared, and talking about that and talking about like what happened in the past. It like kind of offered, a different environment. It was outdoors. It was in nature. I didn't feel trapped or closed in. And so, for me, it definitely provided an avenue to, I think, opening up my ability to be able to be more present in the world.
So when you work with individuals now, in the bio, I mentioned that you work with first responders, lawyers, medical providers, therapists, and et cetera. What are you specifically trying to deliver? What's your message? What's your hope in helping people, or how? What do you want them to know, to hear, to learn?
I think specifically, there's so many things I could share, but like, I think specifically what I want is that all of those professions, they have really hard jobs in front of them. And I think I want to help them make it easier, because I'm sure that when you're working or you encounter somebody who's highly traumatized, and even for myself, when if you would have met me when I was 18, I would have sounded probably like I was like about 6 years old. I probably would have made eye contact with you. I would have waited for somebody else to give me permission to talk. And most people in these professions just don't understand that I wasn't trying to be defiant. I wasn't trying to make their jobs difficult. I just didn't have the skill set to do anything different in that moment than where I was at. And so what I want to do is just help provide them with some really simple tips that will improve the time that it takes for them to get their job that they're there to do. So, if they're a first responder there and there's a medical emergency, there's a few simple things that they can do to shorten that amount of time and allow that person to be more cooperative with them than if they just go in like they would normally go in with the situation.
So in terms of working with other people do you work with other people who've been traumatized, and not just professionals? Or professionals obviously can be traumatized, but do you work with clients also who've been impacted by trauma?
I do a little bit.
Okay.
Generally, that's not the population that I work with, because, I want to be really careful to kind of make sure I'm not a licensed therapist, and I want to just make sure that I'm not like, having them come to me for therapeutic work.
Sure. So in terms of, if we've kind of folded back here to, that instance with the first responder, get specific. What are some of the things that they should know? This is really helpful for the listeners here.
Yeah, I would say, like before you approach, like if you're sensing from the individual, or you happen to know that that person was through or is coming out of a traumatic situation, like for instance, if you know that a child's just been abused and they're there now and they're needing medical care, I would say just slow down and try, and even if there's an emergency situation, you can take a few more seconds, talk to the person, ask permission before you just kind of start grabbing limbs or putting bandages on and all those kinds of things. Let them know who you are and what you're there to do, and ask them if it's okay. And they're more than likely going to say it's okay, but just that little slight step of asking permission before, because they're so used to having things just done to them, and it causes them to want to fight back, right. and or resist, or get younger, or go within themselves. And if you don't take those few minutes to kind of build some trust, just slowing everything way, way, way down, and letting them come to the idea about what they want to do next.
Yeah, I think those are beautiful. I mean, they're seemingly simple, but they're not necessarily easy, and yet they're so profound in the positive impact they can have. Right.
You're right.
I so appreciate that. So, man, I mean, your story is intense, and it's just to hear you talk about getting, being in a spot now where you want to help. I mean, that to me is so inspiring. What are some of the, if I may, what are some of the challenges that you've come across in doing this work for yourself?
The biggest challenge is finding people who are trained and that can really be helpful beyond a point of just being a nice person. And also just picking up the phone and having to call multiple different people to try and get the resources that I need. That's been hard, for sure. And having the medical profession genuinely not understand what they're seeing, and making assumptions about things that they see on my body that they don't understand, and either they ignore it and won't even ask a question about it because they don't want to know, or they make an assumption that especially when I was still kind of in the situation and trying to get out, making assumptions that it was me self-harming myself as opposed to it was that I was harmed, and just not having compassion, I guess, I think it comes back to, it's very difficult for people to know that these kinds of things happen, and to protect themselves, I think it's easier to not believe it.
Yeah. I mean, that, this topic of, I mean, you used several terms for, I think one of which was ritual abuse. And there are people out there who, right, they're deniers. There are people who don't believe this stuff takes place. I was just interviewing someone else who's done a lot of research into this field. And, he said, I don't have that. He said, unfortunately, I don't have that liberty not to believe. But what you're saying here is that you've encountered a lot of people who just don't want to believe. I mean, this stuff is horror. It's horrible. I mean, it's like, my God, how do we? It's so just awful. I mean, what do you say to therapists who need and will probably at some point be encountering people? What do you want them to hear?
Well, I think that they need to know that it's okay for them to make mistakes. The biggest thing is that, when I've talked to people before, they think they have to get everything perfect with it. And that's not what a client's expecting. You don't need to be their savior. It's more beneficial for them to have you be a partner with them in healing rather than to save them, because it's not, most people have aged out of the ability to be able to have that parent-child kind of relationship. And so coming in and being that isn't really what they need, because they need to learn to grow and develop and be able to do things on their own. Be willing to let go of being right and just be with the client. Like they probably, practitioners have ideas about, how they've been taught, and this is their belief system, or this is what's going to work, and this is what I do with all of my clients. Well, that may not work with this client, and so being willing to keep learning and adapt with what your client needs. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things that I've seen practitioners not be able to do, because they get very set and comfortable. Probably, and I'm in education, and we all get comfortable with like what we feel we know how to do. Right. But when you're working with somebody who has dissociation and high levels of trauma, it's going to change too based on the day. So, you may have a plan, and that plan may need to get abandoned based on what's showing up in that moment. And it might happen more often with highly traumatized people than it does with people who have less trauma going on in their life. Yeah. And I would say do their own work. None of us really get unscathed in this world without being touched by trauma. And, if you're not taking care of yourself, your client stuff is going to bump into your stuff, and vice versa. And be okay with being able to have your own support system outside of your client.
Yeah. I want to remind everyone that I'm speaking with Maddie Caballo. Her website is Maddie Caballo. That's MaddieCaballo.com. I'll have this up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Maddie, how about a go-to book recommendation?
All right. So one of the books that's really impacted me is The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch. He published it in 2008. It's probably one most everybody knows, but it really stuck with me as I read and listened to it many, many times, because it was my first kind of aha moment that you can still do and be something great and awesome, even if you're dealt an unfair deck. He never gave up. His speech he gave was, he was tenacious, even in his struggle with illness. And he made a big difference in just that one speech. And for me, it reminds me that I can make a big difference too.
The Last Lecture, that's by Randy Pausch. And just as we kind of wrap up here, share with our listeners about your website, about what you do. Who's your kind of ideal client in a sense?
Sure. So my website is just www.maddiecaballo.com, and you can find information there on different speaking topics that I go around and share. My ideal, presentations I would do in front of clinicians, practitioners of all different sorts, medical professionals, lawyers, attorneys, first responders, anybody who actually is in a helping profession that's more than likely going to come into contact with people who are highly traumatized, and just help them be able to do their job a little bit easier.
Awesome. Maddie, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I think we're all lucky there are people out there like you who are doing this work.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
CPTSDFoundation.org provides daily recovery support, live group calls, 365 days a year. All calls are led by trauma-informed advocates, authors, and highly respected practitioners in the field of trauma recovery. CPTSDFoundation.org helps survivors connect with others who've walked through the fire of abuse and are on a path toward healing. After working with thousands of survivors all around the world, they know how to help you escape the shame of abuse by connecting with like-minded individuals so you can finally feel like healing is possible. Stop isolating between therapy appointments. Getting re-traumatized with your current strategy is no longer necessary. Reach out to CPTSD Foundation today and discover the life-changing, daily, trauma-informed peer support you've been waiting for. That's CPTSDFoundation.org. PESI.org. You know how deeply trauma impacts your client's mind, body, and emotions, and how difficult healing can be. You have clients who are constantly and unpredictably triggered by their traumatic experiences, controlled by emotions of shame, anxiety, anger, depression, and fear, and even turning to substance abuse, cutting, and other harmful behaviors to cope. World-renowned expert and author Dr. Janina Fisher's proven approach to complex trauma treatment, which is based on 40-plus years of research and clinical practice, addresses the holistic impact of trauma to effectively heal deep trauma and attachment wounds so clients can break free from the past, feel safe, calm, and thrive in life. If you're ready to become a certified complex trauma treatment professional and master neurobiologically informed treatments that will heal trauma, save marriages and families, and help clients take back their lives, then join my friends over at PESI and save $500 today by signing up at www.pesi.com/trauma treatment. That's www.pesi, spelled PESI.com/trauma treatment.